Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's State and Federal Program Directors meeting. I'm Adrienne Balcazar, and I'd like to introduce the LCAP-State and Federal Programs Unit. Joining us today is Helen Choi,
Good morning.
Laurel Estrada,
Good morning.
Augustine Garcia,
Good morning.
Rachel Garcia,
Good morning, everyone.
Anita Lomeli,
Hello, everyone.
and Christiana Park.
Good morning, everyone.
And also joining us is our support staff, April Grease and
Good
Susanna
morning.
Mendoza.
Good morning.
Great. To access today's presentation, we ask you to click on the link in the chat, and this will take you directly to the slides. Also, if you follow the link on this slide, it will take you to our Canvas page where the presentation can be accessed through the icon as shown here, as well as any additional resources we have. Today's topics on our agenda are the LCAP Federal Addendum, the Comprehensive Needs Assessment, Equitable Services, the FPM Update, the DLAC and ELAC, and LCAP Update. We ask you to place your questions in the chat box, and we will answer any simple questions if we can. We also will be following up with a written response in a Q&A that will be emailed to you and also posted. We are recording today's meeting and will also be recording this on our website. And now I turn it over to Augustine, who will share about the LCAP Federal Addendum.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good morning and happy Thursday, everyone. So in this first section, like Adrienne said, we're going to take a look at the LCAP Federal Addendum. So LEAs that apply for federal ESSA funds are required to complete the LCAP Federal Addendum. The addendum is designed to supplement the LCAP. So together, the LCAP Federal Addendum, and the CONAP meet the ESSA LEA plan requirements. The good news is that the federal addendum only needs to be submitted to the CDE for approval once during the current authorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. In other words, LEAs do not need to resubmit the updated addendum every year. So if your addendum has already been approved by the CDE, you're all set. No annual resubmission is required. However, LEAs that are applying for ESSA funding for the first time this year must complete and submit a board-approved LCAP Federal Addendum in the CDE submission system by March 31st of 2026. This also applies if you're applying for a specific ESSA program for the first time. So for example, if an LEA already has an approved addendum for Titles 1 and 2, but is applying for Title 4 for the first time in 25-26, the LEA will need to complete and submit the Title 4 section of the addendum to the CDE for approval. So LEAs are required to review their federal addendum annually and revise it as needed. So basically, your LCAP federal addendum should reflect your current federal programs and what you're actually implementing in your LEA with those federal funds. If the addendum no longer matches your current programs, then it needs to be updated. There isn't a specific deadline for when the federal addendum must be reviewed and revised. However, LEAs are strongly encouraged to review it annually alongside their LCAP. Any revisions to the federal addendum are made locally and don't need to be submitted to the CDE unless a specific title program office requires it. With that said, revisions must be adopted by the local governing board. And finally, remember that LEAs are required to prominently post the approved LCAP federal addendum along with any revisions on the LEA's homepage. So this slide here highlights key considerations when reviewing and revising the LCAP federal addendum. For Title I, LEAs must review annually and revise as needed. The Educator Equity section requires an annual data analysis describing how the LEA identifies and addresses disparities in access to effective, experienced, and in-field teachers. LEAs should conduct a local equity gap analysis and may use the CDE tools linked on this slide. For Title II, again, review annually and revise if needed. You'll want to update the prioritizing funding section if you have schools that are newly identified for CSI or TSI. For Title III, again, review annually and revise if the use of Title III funds changes. For Title IV, review annually and revise if the program or use of funds changes. Here, it's important LEAs receiving at least $30,000 must complete a needs assessment every 3 years and reflect those results in the addendum. And regarding transferability, if transferring Title II or IV funds, make sure to update the addendum accordingly. Even if all funds are transferred, all program provisions must still be addressed. And just note, this is not an exhaustive list. LEAs remain responsible for meeting all revision requirements and should contact the appropriate title program offices for guidance. So the LCAP Federal Addendum is monitored through the FPM process for several programs, including supportive effective instruction, English learners, and student support and academic enrichment. This slide identifies where the LCAP Federal Addendum is requested as evidence within those three FPM program instruments. While I won't review each item, note that the addendum's annual review and revision are monitored through that FPM process, so be sure to maintain documentation of your reviews as evidence. Also remember that your addendum needs to match your current programs, and FPM reviewers will be looking at whether or not your federal addendum matches what you're currently doing in your district. So let's take a closer look at item 03 and the SEI program instrument. This item specifically monitors the requirement to review and revise the LCAP Federal Addendum. For this item, LEAs will be asked to submit both their original CDE-approved LCAP Federal Addendum and their current revised addendum. FPM reviewers will be looking for evidence documenting the LEA's implementation, monitoring, and revision of the federal addendum. So this may include presentations to a local governing board to obtain feedback on the title programs, meeting agendas, minutes, participant lists from advisory committee meetings, addressing program initiatives, professional development planning sources, and also surveys or feedback forms. And here we've included links to a few resources to support you with the LCAP Federal Addendum. The first one is a link to the CDE LCAP Federal Addendum webpage, which includes descriptions of all the provisions that must be addressed in the addendum for each of the title programs. The second is a link to the LCAP Federal Addendum template, and the third is a link to the template with guiding questions embedded within the document put together by CDE to support LEAs with the review and revision process. The last link is a link or resource that provides an overview of the LCAP Federal Addendum provisions. And that concludes this section, and now I'll turn it over to Tina for the Comprehensive Needs Assessment.
Well, thank you, Augustine, and good morning, everyone, and once again, happy Thursday. Over the next few minutes, we'll walk through why conduct a comprehensive needs assessment and how that work helps us better understand the why behind student outcomes. But ultimately, this is not just about compliance. It's about using data intentionally to inform decisions and improve outcomes for our students. So why is a comprehensive needs assessment required? There are many federal programs that require planning and a needs assessment. But to ground our work today, let's take a moment to focus on a school operating a Title I Part A school-wide program. They must conduct a comprehensive needs assessment of the entire school. This helps the school in two important ways: to help the school understand the subjects and skills for which teaching and learning need to be improved, and identify the specific academic needs of students who are failing or are at risk of failing to meeting the challenging state academic standards. This requirement comes from ESSA Section 1114B6 and also is reflected in the federal regulations at 34 CFR 200.26A1. It is also important to note that it is legally required by state and federal law, but however, the process is not defined in statute. So let's define comprehensive needs assessment. At its core, comprehensive needs assessment is about addressing the gaps between current outcomes and desired outcomes using data-informed analysis grounded in verifiable state and local data, aligned to state priorities, and informed by the California School Dashboard to clearly understand the current reality. It's also a systemic improvement process to identify strengths and areas of opportunity of the school and to dig deeper into root causes. Root cause analysis is a critical part of the needs assessment process because it addresses the problem rather than the symptoms of the problem. The goal of the needs assessment is to help educators identify, understand, and prioritize the needs that a district or a school must address to improve student outcomes. For purposes of this presentation, the term comprehensive assessment, needs assessment, and needs assessment will be used interchangeably. Let's take a look at this needs assessment for improvement that CDE has shared with us as one of the ways to be used as a best practice. And a needs assessment for improvement is not an isolated tool. Essentially, it's the first step in the continuous improvement cycle. While neither ESSA nor the California Education Code spells out this exact step-by-step process, both require a comprehensive needs assessment as a foundation for the school plan. This visual you see on the right displays just one of the ways to show effective, practical ways to organize the work. Here are the first 3 steps, and it all begins with gathering verifiable state and local data. Some of the examples you see here include California School Dashboard, local indicator data, data and collected and reported to CalPADS in the consolidated application, local assessments, and also making sure that there is input from our educational partners like SSC feedback and surveys. From there, the focus shifts to analyzing the data and evaluating the effectiveness. Which student groups aren't meeting or are at risk of meeting state standards? Are current actions actually working? An example of a probing question for data analysis might be, does our dashboard data reflect what we're seeing? Why or why not? This step helps us make sense of the numbers and trends. Next, we dig into the root causes. This is the why behind the data. Looking at the problem itself is not just the symptoms. You want to identify how teaching and learning can be enhanced and improved by examining areas like instructional gaps, resource inequities, and barriers to student engagement. This ensures that the solutions we designed are targeted and intentional. For example, we might be asking a probing question, are these data outcomes the result of factors outside our school community, such as the current situations that we are actually facing today are ICE raids, changes in social services? Understanding these root causes helps us to plan strategies and actions, which is the next step that truly addresses student needs. With the insights gathered, create clear, attainable goals that are directly tied to identified needs to improve student outcomes. A goal should answer the question, what is the school seeking to achieve? A helpful framework for writing goals is using the SMART approach. Then, strategies and activities are designed to address the findings from the needs assessment, taking into account state priorities and any resource inequities identified through the LEA's budget, LCAP, or school-level budgeting. These strategies must be evidence-based, as ESSA requires, and provide opportunities for every student, including all identified student groups, especially those who are not meeting or are at risk of not meeting academic state standards, to reach those standards. For more information on evidence-based interventions, a link from the California Department of Education is provided below. And finally, annual measurable outcomes are established by using the data and feedback gathered in the needs assessment. The school will identify which metrics to use to track progress in accomplishing each goal. In addition, the metrics can also help determine the impact and effectiveness of those strategies. By following this cycle, successful needs assessment drives intentional, aligned acts of school improvement rather than random acts of compliance. Each LEA should be able to tell a complete story that flows from data to goals to actions, which every step to strengthen student outcomes. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Rachel, to go over equitable services.
Thank you, Tina, and hello again, everyone. So as Tina mentioned in this next section, we have a brief refresher on equitable services and specifically the consultation process as districts are beginning this process for the 26-27 school year. So what are equitable services? Equitable services refer to educational services and resources that are provided to eligible students and teachers in eligible nonprofit private schools using federal education program funds. And under ESSA, LEAs are required to offer equitable services to eligible private school students, teachers, families, and also other educational personnel. However, participation by private schools is not required. Services must be equitable to those provided to participating public school students and teachers, though they do not need to be identical. Instead, services should be designed based on the specific needs of the private school students and teachers. And it's also important to note that all services, they must be secular, neutral, and non-ideological, and also must supplement rather than supplant the basic level of services that private schools are responsible for providing to their students, staff, and families. And then lastly, the funds may not be provided directly to the private school. So equitable services only apply to federal funds and not to any state funds. And so you can see listed on this slide are the ESSA programs to which they apply. And so this includes Title I Part A, Title I Part C, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, Title IV Part A, as well as Title IV Part B, and Project Serve. And so you can see most of these are formula grant programs, with the exception of Title IV Part B, which that's a competitive grant, and then also Project Serve, which is a discretionary project-based grant that's awarded on a case-by-case basis. So an important thing to remember is that funds for equitable services, they must be obligated in the fiscal year that the funds are received, so that eligible private school students, teachers, and also other educational personnel and families receive the services that they're entitled to in a timely manner. And so this also really reinforces the requirement for LEAs to engage in that consultation process with private school officials so that they may begin services at the same time as the public school program. Now, another key reminder is that the LEA must retain control of all funds used for equitable services. And so this means that any materials, equipment, and property purchased with these funds for equitable services, they belong to the district and must be included on the district inventory, as well as collected at the end of the year. And so remember that materials or equipment, they're intended for use during that fiscal year, and continued use in the following years, it must be determined through consultation based on the needs of the students. Also, all materials or equipment must be purchased directly by the school district and also received by a district employee. And so this means that materials or equipment cannot be sent directly to the private school from the vendor, and private school officials may not sign for the delivery of materials. Finally, equitable services must be provided either by an LEA employee or through a third-party contractor. And remember that all employment and contractual agreements must remain under the control and supervision of the LEA. Now, in terms of private school participation, remember that the requirements for Title I Part A are different than that of the other title programs. So for Title I Part A, nonprofit private schools, both within and outside of the district boundaries, may be eligible to participate. And that's because funding and services are based on the student's residence in a Title I school attendance area. So for example, if low-income students live in a Title I school attendance area within your district, but attend a nonprofit private school outside of your district boundaries, then those students may generate funds for Title I services. It's also important to remember that poverty does not determine who actually receives Title I services. To be eligible for Title I services, private school students must live in a Title I school attendance area and also be failing or most at risk of failing based on multiple educationally related criteria that's agreed upon during the consultation process. Now, for the other federal programs, such as Title I Part C and Titles II, III, and IV, only nonprofit private schools within the district's boundaries may participate in those programs. So this graphic on this slide, it provides an overview of the consultation process. And so consultation with nonprofit private schools, remember, it's the responsibility of the LEA, and it must be done on an annual basis. And the goal of this process is to reach agreement on how to provide equitable and effective programs for eligible private school students, teachers, and families. And so now the first step in this process is to identify those eligible private schools. And so remember, only nonprofit private schools that have submitted an affidavit to the CDE may participate in equitable services. And so there are a few ways to access the list of private schools for your LEA. And so the first link on this slide, it will take you to the CDE website where you can download a private school data file that includes a list of all private schools with an affidavit on file. And then you would just want to filter this file by your LEA. The second link is a searchable database that allows a search by district for the private schools within district boundaries. And so for this database, a county password is required. And so we've listed the password for LA County on the slide. But if you're in another county, you must contact the CDE private school office for the specific password for your county. Now, one really important thing to keep in mind is that the CDE does not verify the accuracy of the information on affidavits. And so the CDE expects that districts verify the accuracy of this information, so that would include the student enrollment data and tax exempt status through the consultation process. And so that's important to remember as you're consulting with private school officials. You want to be sure to verify this information. So the next step in the process is to contact eligible nonprofit private schools to make them aware of the programs and services for which their students and staff may be eligible. And so remember, for Title I Part A, you would contact private schools within your district boundaries, as well as private schools outside of your district boundaries, such as those in adjoining districts, to determine if they have eligible students enrolled. And then for all other federal programs, you would only contact those private schools within your district boundaries. Now, most LEAs use some sort of intent to participate letter to initiate contact with private schools. And it's usually at this time of the year that districts start reaching out to private schools to begin the consultation process for next year's services. And so in this letter, you would include a brief description of the programs for which your district participates, and you may request that the private school indicate their intent to participate in any or all of the applicable programs. And remember, it's okay to include a deadline as long as you provide adequate time for the private schools to respond. Now, we often hear from districts that they sometimes don't get responses from private schools. And so if you don't receive a response from private school officials, you should make multiple attempts to contact the private school, and then also be sure to maintain documentation of those contact attempts. And it's a good idea to send letters or communication by certified mail, or if you're using email with the red receipt. And so that way you're able to document those outreach attempts, especially if the private schools aren't responding to you. So consultation involves ongoing discussions and meetings between public and private school officials on key topics related to the provision of equitable services. And remember, the goal is reaching agreement. And so really the key word here is ongoing. as there are many required topics that must be discussed during consultation. And so on this slide, you can see some of those required topics are listed. And so consultation with private school officials, it must be timely and meaningful. And so that means it must begin early enough to prepare for the next school year. And so it's also important to keep in mind that a unilateral offer of services by a district without the opportunity for discussion, that's not considered adequate consultation. And so the consultation process, it must provide an opportunity for private school officials to express their views and to also have those views considered. So districts must also maintain documentation that verifies that it has met the requirement for timely and meaningful consultation and that it has provided equitable services. And so this includes intent to participate letters, signed written affirmations, and then also documentation of outreach to private schools. And then again, as mentioned on the previous slide, anything mailed should be sent via certified mail, and then anything emailed should be sent with red receipts. Other examples of documentation might include meeting agendas and minutes, any data collected to assess or evaluate the services, service agreements or contracts with vendors, monitoring and assessment tools, any inventory list for materials or equipment, and then also identification criteria that's used for student eligibility for Title I services. So here we see a screenshot of the CDE's intent to participate and written affirmation form. And so we've also included a link on the slide to access these sample documents. And so as mentioned, most districts will use some sort of intent to participate form to make that initial contact or outreach. And so it's really important that you obtain a copy of the intent to participate form from each private school, whether or not they intend to participate. And then you would begin the consultation process with those private schools that have indicated their intent to participate. And so districts are also required to maintain in its records, as mentioned, the written affirmation signed by each nonprofit private school. And this is to document that timely and meaningful consultation has occurred. And on this form, private school officials must also have the option to indicate their belief that timely and meaningful consultation has not occurred, or that the program design for private school participants is not equitable. And this information, it's then reported to the CDE through the nonprofit private school consultation page that's in the Spring CONAP submission in June. And so here you can see a screenshot of that nonprofit private school consultation page that gets submitted with the Spring CONAP. And so this is where LEAs, they'll report the results of consultation. And so on this form, LEAs are asked to indicate for each nonprofit private school if consultation occurred, if consultation agreement was met, also if there was a signed written affirmation on file, and then you also have to provide a consultation code indicating the private school's belief that timely and meaningful consultation has or has not occurred, or if the program design is not equitable. And so you'll want to keep this in mind as you're beginning the consultation process now with private schools for programs and services for next year, because you'll be reporting this information to the CDE in the Spring CONAP. Now here we see a sample consultation timeline, and this has been adapted from a sample CDE timeline. And so we've also included the link to the CDE sample at the bottom of the slide for your reference. And so you can see in this timeline, again, it's recommended that districts begin that consultation process for the next year's services in February. And this is to ensure, again, that services begin in a timely manner. And then also you can see in the timeline that consultation, it should be ongoing throughout the year. And then you'll also notice that there may be times during the year where districts are consulting with private school officials on both the current year's services as well as the next year's services. So here on this slide, we've included a few links to some resources for you. And so the first link is to the CDE's Equitable Services Ombudsman webpage. And so this webpage, it has quite a few resources. There's frequently asked questions, links to the Equitable Services pages for Title I, II, III, and IV. Also, forms that provide the method for calculating the Equitable Services proportional share for each of the applicable federal programs. Then we've also included the links to the Title I Equitable Services non-regulatory guidance, as well as the Title VIII Equitable Services non-regulatory guidance. And so this one applies to the other federal programs, such as Titles II, III, and IV. And the last thing we wanted to share is that we are offering an Equitable Services workshop next week on February 25th at 10 a.m. And so here at this workshop, we'll be going more in depth on equitable services requirements, including the specific requirements for Titles I, II, III, and IV. And then the registration link, it's included on the slide for those interested. And so that concludes this section. I will now turn it over to Laurel.
Thank you, Rachel. So today we are going to focus the FPM update on some common findings in recent FPMs. As always, even if your LEA has not been identified for an FPM review, best practice is to take a look at systems and procedures to maintain ongoing compliance with state and federal programs. So according to CDE, these are the areas of frequent findings in recent years with similar patterns noted in the current year. These include policies and procedures related to education equity, uniform complaints procedures, PE, early education division, and fiscal monitoring. Other common findings relate to time and effort, instructional requirements for English learners and PE, allowable use of funds, and components of career technical education and adult education related to program structure, collaboration, and alignment. In this year's reviews, there have been additional findings related to comprehensive sexual health education, including training, criteria, and instructional requirements. This is the first year that comprehensive sexual health education is included as an area of FPM review, which likely accounts for the frequency of findings. You'll find that elements of fiscal monitoring can be a source of findings, even if fiscal monitoring itself is not selected as an area of review, because aspects such as the ones starred here are reviewed in several program instruments. So for today's update, we're going to take a closer look at some frequent findings related to fiscal monitoring, but a link to the CDE FPM box resources is included in this slide if you want to explore the other areas. Looking locally, this chart includes recent findings in LA County FPM reviews. You'll note that these LA County findings align to the ones reported by CDE as frequent findings statewide, and many fall into the area of fiscal monitoring. You can see that the fiscal monitoring areas are sources of findings in fiscal monitoring and in other programs. We've included those in red font to illustrate the point. After this section, my colleague Anita will be going into more detail on avoiding findings related to ELAC and DLAC. But for now, let's take a closer look at fiscal monitoring. For background on fiscal monitoring, the California Department of Education provides guidance to LEAs on fiscal requirements that impact state and federal programs. It's incumbent upon LEAs to create and maintain programs that meet both fiscal and program requirements. This highlights the importance of fiscal and program staff working together to ensure that policies, practices, procedures, and documentation are compliant both fiscally and programmatically. The components of the FPM program instrument for fiscal monitoring are listed here, and we have attached the entire document to the bottom of this slide. The program instrument provides lists of evidence requests that demonstrate compliance. It's important to go through and double check that the LEA is prepared and has structures in place to maintain ongoing compliance. We've also linked the federal grants guidance to this slide. Okay, so we'll start by taking a look at allowability requirements for expending federal funds. In an FPM review, expenditures and salaries will be examined to verify that they are allowable to programs where they're charged. It's important to follow the federal requirements, and written procedures need to specify that all the components listed on this slide are included and documented. At a most basic level, allowability procedures that LEAs develop should support staff in determining whether a cost is allowable. Staff should be trained in allowability and be able to know at least the general criteria for allowability when it comes to state and federal program expenditures, with the written procedure available as a reference. All costs must conform to the components listed on this slide. Reviewers will look through the general ledger and then ask for invoices and other backup documentation to support whether expenses were allowable. In the next slide, we'll look at some red flags related to expenditures that could result in non-compliance. Using the components of allowability from the previous slide, reviewers have found that expenditures listed on this slide may have resulted in findings. Policies must clearly explain procedures related to allowability, and documentation must back up each expenditure. For example, before providing food or catering or approving travel or conferences, it's important to determine whether it is necessary, reasonable, and allocable, and consistent with federal law. It's also important to review the procurement policy to ensure that staff responsible for implementing it are trained and understand the constraints of using federal funds. The procurement policy and procedures should clarify the focus of obtaining a fair and reasonable price for purchasing, leasing, renting, or selling materials, services, equipment, or construction. Both state and federal procurement requirements must be followed. In cases where they differ, the more stringent requirements should be applied. The bid threshold for large contracts updates annually in December typically. We have noted the new threshold as of January 1st, 2026 on this slide. As a result of this annual threshold adjustment, the procurement policy is one that should be reviewed and updated accordingly. Procurement policies must address conflict of interest. Policies that lack this provision or only partially account for conflicts of interest can result in a finding. Provisions for conflict of interest in the procurement policy should encompass both minor and major conflicts and must include disciplinary action language for when it is violated. Competition for bids should be full and open with no unfair advantage given to the awarded contract. Finally, a potential source of findings lies in a school site neglecting to include all Title I expenditures in the SIPSA. Let's continue with some red flags related to cost objectives, which connects to time and effort requirements. When it comes to tasks performed by federally funded employees, it's important to make sure they are performing duties that are not required by law or required to be made available under other federal, state, or local laws. Their duties must supplement and not supplant. Looking at the examples on this slide, administering the LPAC and providing accommodations according to a student's IEP are examples of functions that are required by law and should not be conducted by federally funded employees. A related example is a federally funded employee performing tasks at non-Title I school sites. Another red flag would be a service being provided by a federally funded employee if the service was provided the prior year using non-federal funds. The reviewers monitor time and effort records and conduct interviews with employees to determine whether the duties of federally funded employees are attributed to the correct cost objective, and that restricted funds are not providing services that are required by law or being provided at non-Title I schools. Looking ahead to the upcoming school year, CDE has informed us that the FPM process, timeline, and notification for the selection of schools and LEAs for review remain unchanged. The anticipated number of LEAs to be reviewed is likely to be greater than the number reviewed during this school year and similar to prior years. FPM training will be conducted virtually in August of 2026. Reviews begin in September of 2026. Notification is typically provided in the spring, and our team is available should you have questions related to FPM and maintaining ongoing compliance with state and federal programs. And with that, I'll hand it off to Anita, who will continue looking at frequent FPM findings related to English learner programs.
Thank you, Laurel. It's always a good idea to take a deeper look at ELAC and DLAC requirements. Now, to ground ourselves with the why of all things EL in our state, we begin the journey with the California English Learner Roadmap policy, which was adopted unanimously by our State Board of Education about 8.5 years ago. This policy provides guidance to all LEAs on how to welcome, understand, and educate English learners enrolled in public schools all across the state. Now, California's vision of success for English learners is one where English learner students fully access and participate in a 21st century education from early childhood all the way through 12th grade that results in their attainment of high levels of English proficiency, mastery of grade level standards, and opportunities to develop proficiency in multiple languages. The EL roadmap offers a destination that ensures optimal success for English learners as they become future language proficient graduates. Now, the California EL roadmap consists of 4 principles that are intended to guide all levels of the system towards a coherent and aligned set of practices, services, relationships, and approaches to teaching and learning that add up to a powerful, effective education for all English learners. The 4 principles provide a research-based, systemic framework for schools to support English learners by valuing their assets, ensuring high-quality instruction, fostering supportive environments, and ensuring alignment across educational systems. For today's training, we will be connecting with the first principle, assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, with the first part of the EL program instrument. In this first principle, EL programs value and build upon the cultural and linguistic assets students bring to their education in a safe and affirming school climates. Educators value and build strong family, community, and school partnerships. And right now, I'm pretty sure that we're all thinking that one great way to do this begins with our ELACs and DLACs, and you would be correct. So the ELAC and DLAC are not only a compliance requirement for your EL master plan, These two advisory committees can really be inspirational to your school and LEA culture as they empower parents as partners in education, strengthening student advocacy and building inclusive school communities. And truly, these two committees were my favorite when I worked at the school site and at the district office. While the roadmap is like a blueprint providing an inspiring state-of-the-art vision and design, the FPM-EL program instrument is like a building inspector who checks for compliance and safety. It helps us build a high-impact EL educational design by ensuring that it is built according to state policy and federal law. The EL program instrument is what will verify if the foundation of our design is safe, if the wiring is legal, if the doors are accessible, if you will. So now when the building inspector comes to your LEA or your school site to conduct an FPM walkthrough of your English Learner Advisory Committee, also known as the ELAC, it's helpful to know what he or she will be looking for. First, any school that has 21 or more English learners is required to have a functioning ELAC that meets these 5 requirements. And in the case of ELAC, there are 5 letters of the law. First letter, A. Parent members must be elected by other parents of EL students. B. Parents of EL students in the committee must be at least the same percentage as ELs in your student body. C. The ELAC must assist in the development of the school-wide needs assessment and in ways to make parents aware of the importance of regular school attendance. D. Advise in the development of the site plan for English learner students and submit the plan for consideration to the school site council for inclusion in the SIPSA. And E. Receive training and training materials to assist the members in carrying out their legal responsibilities. Now, in these next few slides, we will take a look at each of these requirements and go over some helpful tips provided by the FPM building inspectors, also known as reviewers. So to begin, it is very important that an ELAC is established at the beginning of the school year to ensure that you have enough time to carry out all the requirements. Also, it's critical to remember that ELAC members are voted in by parents of EL students. It's going to be very important to know who those parents are so that you know who to provide the ballot to. And although some parents of EL students may choose not to vote, all of them must have the opportunity to vote. And once you have collected the votes, be sure to keep those filed away for when the inspector comes around. If you have parents of ELs vote electronically, make sure that you have a roster of who you sent the ballots to and have the results downloaded and stored in a file. And that file can be electronic or otherwise. Make sure that your ELAC is constituted correctly. So if your EL student body is 40% of your total school enrollment, your ELAC membership must have at least 40% parents of EL students. Yes, parents of reclassified or proficient English or English only students can be a part of your ELAC. But to demonstrate to the inspector that your ELAC membership is constituted correctly, know your EL enrollment percentage. Keep sign-in sheets and rosters from this current year and last year, and make sure that you've noted each member's child's EL acquisition status, whether that's that their student is an EL, an EO, an RFEP, etc. The parents' roles, such as member, president, vice president, who your DLAC representative is, also should go on that roster. And now that you know what will be collected, create sign-in sheets with columns requesting this information from the get-go. And after each meeting, review the sign-in sheets to ensure that all the information is available and correct and complete. Now, to prove that your ELAC has assisted in the development of the school-wide needs assessment and has assisted in making parents aware of the importance of regular school attendance, make sure that these are listed on your agendas. The requirements of what needs to be brought up to an ELAC meeting is known ahead of time. Create your agendas for the year with these requirements, perhaps on the very top part of your agenda, and check them off as you cover them. It's okay to discuss these topics more than once, and by having the agendas with the requirements listed, it helps everyone keep the purpose of the committee and their responsibilities at the forefront. This will not preclude you from adding other items to the agenda as the year moves forward. Keep detailed minutes of these required topics and ensure that the minutes have a thorough and accurate accounting of how parents assisted and provided input. Parents have great insight. Be certain to memorialize their contributions. And just thinking about attendance, most likely the parents who attend your ELAC are the ones whose kids have great attendance. They often have thoughtful ideas on how to influence other parents with attendance, thus making them a great resource, not only for your ELAC, but for your entire school. And when your ELAC members provide their insight and advice on the site plan for EL students that will be submitted to your school site council for consideration into the SIPSA, let them know what is happening and how important that SIPSA is. Keep this requirement on your agenda and keep detailed minutes that account for this. Knowing that the minutes will be a critical piece of evidence during an FPM, it behooves one to ensure that a designated person is trained to keep the detailed minutes at each of the meetings if possible. Now, the last requirement of the ELAC is that members receive training materials and training to assist members in carrying out their legal responsibilities. These training topics are planned in full consultation with the committee members. Ask them what they would like to be trained on. Make sure that your agenda lists the training topics and provide evidence of the training and the materials, and ensure your minutes denote input from your membership. Here are a few examples of training topics that can be shared with your membership. They include what an ELAC member's role entails, to Robert's Rules of Order, my personal favorite, or how a parent can prepare for a parent-teacher conference, or how to read an LPAC and SBAC test results. Truly, these training opportunities will keep your members coming back to your ELAC meetings. Now moving on to DLAC. An LEA with 51 or more EL students must form a DLAC unless the district designates for this purpose a subcommittee of an existing district-wide advisory committee. But please note that parents or guardians or both of pupils of limited English proficient students who are not employed by the district shall constitute the majority of the DLAC. A DLAC must also follow the letter of the law, and here are the requirements. A, advise on the development of the LEA master plan. Advise on the administration of the LEA-wide needs assessment on a school-by-school basis. Advise on the establishment of LEA program goals and objectives for programs and services for EL students per the SBE adopted EL roadmap policy. Advise on the development of the plan to ensure compliance with any applicable teacher and instructional aid requirements. Review and comment on the LEA's reclassification procedure, and review and comment on the written notifications required to be sent to parents and guardians. Now, some optimal practices for a successful DLAC include having the agendas made ahead of time. Create agendas that list the DLAC requirements and mark them off as the requirements are met. Keep detailed minutes that include how and when the DLAC met its required tasks. Ensure that agendas and minutes include the trainings provided to members in order to assist them in carrying out their legal advisory responsibilities. Meeting minutes should have evidence of solicited input from DLAC members regarding the requirements. Ensure that all schools with an ELAC have a representative on the DLAC on a consistent basis. Is the location and time of the DLAC meetings accessible to all of your ELAC representatives? And if the LEA designates the DLAC to be the LCAP English Learner Parent Advisory Committee, then ensure that the DLAC also provides input on the development of the LCAP. Make sure the input is documented in the meeting minutes. And so as we come to a close on this section, here are a few takeaways that will help to ensure that you have a successful FPM review. Remember that the review is not a matter of if, but when. 1 ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. Familiarize yourself with the EL program instrument. Download it, print it, have it handy. Plan your school year as much as possible with your ELAC and DLAC requirements in mind. When the dashboard is released, how soon afterwards is this information shared with your committees for input on the development of the school needs assessment? As you probably kept hearing over and over again, your meeting minutes are going to be a critical piece of evidence. Have a designated person who will take meeting minutes at your meetings. Keep all of your sign-in sheets, your agendas, and minutes for all of your meetings orderly and in one place. Review policies and procedures regularly and update them as needed. Ensure the processes and procedures are being implemented accordingly. And as a mentor once told me, inspect what you expect. Now, this wraps up the section on ELAC and DLAC requirements. And up next is Helen with LCAP updates. Helen?
Thank you, Anita. So today for the LCAP update, we're going to spend this time walking through the technical assistance prompt for the 26-27 LCAP. If your district has been identified to receive DA support, we hope that this overview will be helpful as you work on developing your 26-27 LCAP draft. So remember that starting the 24-25 LCAP, technical assistance prompt has been added to the LCAP template. LEAs that have requested technical assistance or received it as a result of differentiated assistance eligibility need to provide the reason for technical assistance, including DA eligibility and a description of the support. LEAs that are neither eligible for nor receiving technical assistance may respond to this prompt as not applicable. Here we see the instructions for this prompt. There are 2 key components. First, as indicated by the red star on this screen, the LEA must identify the reason for its eligibility for the differentiated assistance. Second, indicated by the blue star, the LEA must provide a summary of the work that is currently underway as part of the technical assistance being provided. And in addition to the required components that I just covered in the previous slide, in the past approved LCAPs, many districts have chosen to include the specific actions being implemented to address the identified needs, along with their ongoing work with the County Office of Education. For example, if your LEA attended the LACO's Differentiated Assistance Convening earlier this month, or the Charter Symposium, or has been working with our LACO units to receive professional development or other supports, you may reference that support here as well. So let's delve into the eligibility criteria. For the 2025 differentiated assistance determinations, districts and COEs will become eligible based on student group performance in 2 or more state priority areas, or performance on local indicators in 2 or more priority areas, or a combination of student group performance in 1 state priority area and a local indicator performance in 1 different priority area. Also, only applicable for districts and COEs for failing to submit CalPADS data on time. The eligibility criteria for charter schools are the same as those for districts and COEs, except that charter schools must meet them for 2 consecutive years. Therefore, results from the 2024 and 2025 California dashboards are used in DA determinations for charter schools. So all areas remain the same with the exception that starting with the 2025 California dashboard, there is an important update specific to the LTEL student group under Priority Area 4. These changes apply to districts, COEs, and charter schools. So for LTELs, DA eligibility is now based only on the LB for Priority 4. A red or orange performance on the LB may result in eligibility. the ELA and math academic indicators are no longer used for DA determinations for LTEL student groups. And again, for all other student groups, eligibility continues to be based on the combination of ELA math, LP, where applicable, and local indicators and other LCFF state priority areas. So, how do we document this information in the LCAP? So let's get to it. This chart helps clarify how LEA should respond depending on their specific DA situation. The first column applies to districts that are newly identified for DA, and the criteria is different for school districts and charter schools. The next column is for LEAs that were eligible based on the 2024 dashboard and remain eligible for the same student group and priority areas based on the 2025 dashboard. The third column addresses LEAs that continue to receive DA but have new additional student groups that are identified in 2025. In those cases, the 2-year DA support cycle begins again. And finally, the last column is for LEAs that were eligible for DA based on the 2024 dashboard, but are no longer eligible based on the 2025 dashboard. And even in these cases, LEA should complete this prompt since DA is provided in 2-year cycles. So let's take a look at the first column. For these districts, the first part of the DA prompt is to identify the reason for receiving technical assistance. In this section, districts should only include the student groups and the state priority areas identified on the 2025 California dashboard to address this part of the prompt. Therefore, if your school district was newly identified for DA this year, you may use the frame on this slide to help you to write the response for the first part of the prompt. And there is also an example here on this slide for your reference. For charter schools, eligibility for DA is based on 2 consecutive years of the dashboard data. So for this determination, results from both 2024 and 2025 dashboards are used. So in this section, charter schools must clearly identify the reason for DA eligibility in the student groups and the priority areas identified on both the 2024 and the 2025 dashboards. The sentence frame provided is designed to help support all charter schools eligible for DA. Recognize that DA support for charter school is provided 1 year at a time, unlike school districts that may be newly identified based on a single year of data. The next 2 groups are also considered year 1 of DA support. These LEAs are identified based on both the 2024 and 2025 dashboard, whether the student group or the priority areas stayed the same or new eligibility was identified in 2025. Regardless, both the 2024 and 2025 eligibility, including the student groups and the priority areas, should be clearly identified in this part of the prompt. And as you can see again here, the sentence frame provided here is designed to support your LEA to clearly identify those areas. And lastly, the final column represents the LEAs in year 2 of differentiated assistance support. These LEAs are not identified for any student groups or eligibility areas based on the 2025 California dashboard. However, their DA eligibility is based on the 2024 dashboard, and this reflects the second year of the 2-year DA cycle of support. So for districts in year 2 of DA support, the sentence frame shown here helps clearly indicate that while the LEA is not eligible for year 1 differentiated assistance based on the 2025 California dashboard, it remains eligible for year 2 DA support based on the 2024 dashboard. In this section, districts should also clearly identify the student group and the priority areas identified on, that's right, the 2024 dashboard. So this section is not applicable to charter schools, as charter schools DA eligibility is based on 1 year at a time, even though eligibility is based on 2 consecutive years of the California dashboard data. For the second part of the prompt, Be specific about the efforts underway to narrow the achievement gap for the student groups whose performance resulted in DA eligibility. In this section, describe the technical assistance provided and the process your team used to examine the barriers preventing these student groups from achieving at higher levels. Consider the root causes identified through your analysis. For example, are students missing instructional time due to chronic absenteeism or suspensions? Do the students lack foundational skills needed to meet grade level standards? Describe the practices and strategies your team has identified to provide greater access to instructional programs and supports in response to the unique needs of the identified student groups. Additionally, you can also explain how the educational partners were engaged in meaningful conversations to better understand student needs and to inform actions selected. So, to further support the LEAs, we offer some following considerations for what work underway may look like. While emphasizing that this work will look different for every LEA and should reflect the unique circumstances and strength of the underserved student groups and their families, remember that those closest to the work are best positioned to understand the local needs and design supports that build on community assets. The DA process supports districts in reflecting on their systems, being intentional about understanding student needs and strength, and strengthening their capacity to implement sustainable, locally responsive improvement efforts. This work may include how LEA examines academic, behavioral, and social emotional data, considers local context and barriers, and uses the dashboard and local data alongside instructional practices and student engagement to guide decisions related to resources, professional learning, targeted supports for specific student groups. And finally, this reflection should clearly connect the work underway to the actions included in the LCAP, demonstrating how these actions are intentionally designed to address the needs of student groups eligible for DA. And there is one additional requirement for LEAs eligible for technical assistance. Remember, these LEAs must include specific actions in their LCAP that align with the work being implemented as part of the DA. And yes, even if the LEA is in the second year of DA support, there still must be specific actions to be included in the LCAP. And I do have one more announcement regarding LCAP resources. So as we shared back in January, the 26-27 LCAP District Self-Review Guide is now available on our Canvas and on our website. And now the Charter School Self-Review Guide is also available now. It's linked on this slide and it's also included in the chat. So districts can use these guides to check alignment, make sure that they're on the right track, and access resources and guides to support compliance with your LCAP requirements. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Rachel with the final announcements.
Thank you, Helen. So in this last section, we just have a few reminders to share regarding some upcoming deadlines. So the first upcoming deadline reminder is related to required policies on immigration enforcement at school sites. So back in September and October of 2025, the governor signed into law several bills that amended Education Code 234.7. And as a result of that, all LEAs are required to update their existing policies to reflect all of the requirements in Education Code 234.7 by March 1st, 2026. Additionally, LEAs are required to submit their updated board-approved policies that comply with these new requirements to the CDE portal, which we've also linked on the slide, and this is also by March 1st, 2026. And so on the slide, you can see a screenshot of the letter that CDE sent to superintendents and charter school administrators back in December regarding this upcoming March 1st deadline for both the update and the submission of these policies. And so we've also included links to the letter that was sent, the model policies and related guidance, and also the applicable education code for your reference. So here are just a few additional key deadlines to keep in mind. So remember that the CalPADS Fall 2 certification is due by February 27th, and there is no amendment window for Fall 2. Also, the LCAP mid-year update report, remember it must be presented to the governing board by February 28th. For CSI funds, Federal Report 3 for fiscal year 2023 CSI funds, as well as Grant Management Report 3 for the fiscal year 2024 CSI funds, they both must be submitted in GMART by February 28th. Also, remember that each school must update and adopt its comprehensive school safety plan by March 1st. And so remember that there are new components that must be included this year due to legislative updates. So be sure that those new components are included in the plan by that March 1st deadline. Also, ESSA per pupil expenditures or PPE data, it's due to the CDE by March 13th. And then finally, LEAs with the home to school transportation plan must update the plan by April 1st. And so that concludes today's meeting. Thank you all for joining us today. And please take a moment to complete the evaluation for today's meeting. And we appreciate any feedback that you're able to provide. As a reminder, we will not be meeting in March. And so our next meeting will be Thursday, April 30th at 10 a.m. And so if you have any additional questions for us, please be sure to leave them in the chat and we will respond in our Q&A follow-up document. So thank you again for joining us today.